Welcome back and thanks for staying with us as we take you to international news. The latest developments after 27 Palestinians have been killed. We're joined by our correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, a very good evening to you for the latest on a developing story. We know that the Security Service of Ukraine has carried out its third attack against the Crimean bridge since Russia's full-scale war began in 2022. What's the latest?
Well, and Paul, I think what it does tell us is that Ukraine still has the ability to launch stealth, long-planned attacks that can inflict harm on Russian assets, right? The narrative for the last year or so in this long-standing war has been that Russia has been making steady progress, taking territory in a steady move westward, away from the Donetsk and Luhansk areas where it has already annexed territory, and of course has superior power in terms of air force superiority, military superiority on the ground, amid diplomatic pressure being exerted on Ukraine in the main by countries like the United States. And so what Ukraine has been able to do here is shift the narrative, right? Attacking Russian air bases where it has attacked or taken out some 40 plus long-range stealth bombers that were critical to the long-range cruise missiles that have been delivered by Russia's Air Force against Ukraine's infrastructure over the last number of years. And of course then this attack on the infrastructure of the bridge that essentially links mainland Russia with the Crimean Peninsula, that Russia annexed around 2014. And so what the Ukrainians will say, Paul, is that they are seeking to change the calculus on the ground, the military calculus on the ground, so as to put pressure on the Russian administration, on the Kremlin in particular, to get them to come to the negotiating table. Yeah. As you know, the long-standing position now of the Ukrainians, with support from the United States, is a call for a 30-day ceasefire that will engender negotiations, that will bring them to the negotiating table to talk about the intractable issues. The Russians have been very reluctant to agree to that. They are talking now about a 2 to 3 day ceasefire at certain areas on the front line with Ukraine. But that is still, very much a gray area here. And so I think the broad takeaway from what you're seeing from the Ukrainians is an ability to use strategically deployed drones, explosive drones, to take out key military infrastructure of the Russian Federation in the hopes that that will change the Russian calculus on the ground and bring them to the negotiating table a little bit sooner rather than later.
As we try and assess the bigger picture, the impact, perhaps talk a little bit about the kind of symbolic value that the bridge holds for Russia.
Well, this is a bridge that essentially extends Russia's ability to expand its territory. It claimed the Crimean Peninsula, which is not internationally recognized, is in violation of the UN Charter. And that bridge was built in such an expeditious time to link mainland Russia with this newly claimed territory of Crimea. So it has strategic value here for the Russians in terms of connecting or expanding its territory, but also strategic value in terms of it being a supply route in terms of getting supplies to Russia's military to sustain it during this war. So a strategic strike here by the Ukrainians. We do not know the extent to which it has created damage, to which it has stopped the flow of goods and services across that bridge. The Russians say the bridge has been reopened, that the strike was a failure, but such is the narrative that emanates from either side in the fog of war. It's difficult for us here in New York to determine what exactly the truth is. We did see an explosion. This is not the first time that Ukraine has managed to hit this bridge, but this is a very well-fortified asset of the Russian Federation. It is well guarded. So the Ukrainians certainly taking a victory lap by the very fact that they were able to detonate this underwater explosion. We do not know the extent of the damage underwater, but the Russians saying that it had minimal impact here.
Sherwin, there's also another developing story, those horrific scenes as at least 27 Palestinians were killed by Israeli fire as they attempted to collect aid near a distribution site in Gaza. What happened?
Yeah, it's also, difficult for us to pronounce ourselves on exactly what happens in these situations, because there is just so much desperation on the ground. There's so much weaponry on the ground. You don't know if it's Hamas, you don't know if it's the Israeli military, but I'll tell you what the Secretary General said, the statement, and I'll just read you that in Paul. Once again, we are witnessing unthinkable loss of life in Gaza. The Secretary General condemns the loss of lives and injuries to Palestinians seeking aid in Gaza. It is unacceptable. Civilians are risking and in several instances losing their lives to get food. Palestinians have the fundamental right to adequate food and to be free of hunger. The Secretary General continues to call for an immediate and independent investigation into these events and for the perpetrators to be held accountable. The basic needs of the population in Gaza are enormous and are not being met. Israel has a clear obligation under international humanitarian law to agree and to facilitate humanitarian relief for all civilians who need it. And of course, the reports you're getting in terms of the story from witnesses who are at these distribution centers run by the Gaza, the Gaza Foundation. I'll just find the correct terminology for that group. That is an Israeli, US-backed group that is now distributing food and aid in southern Gaza at key distribution sites, but heavily criticized by other humanitarian organizations and the UN in particular over issues of impartiality and neutrality. And the reports we are getting is that witnesses at these distribution sites were fired upon, and as you have been reporting, dozens of people were killed and hundreds injured based on numbers we are receiving from the Red Cross. So what exactly, who was firing on these civilians seeking help and aid remains unclear. The Israeli military saying that it was not them. But of course, again, in the fog of war, difficult for us to say, A is right and B is wrong. We just simply do not know.
Certainly a story that we will continue to monitor. Thank you very much there, correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, bringing us up to speed with the latest on developing stories that we're keeping a close eye on.